All right. So as I said in the initial day, if there's weather or something like that, might have to do a lecture on YouTube. Unfortunately, I got to run down to Georgia. I just found out on Friday, the weekend. Anyway, I can't get anything postponed. I got to go down there for a court date. My one daughter, she goes to Auburn, so I will be able to see her. But my second daughter, I'm trying to bring her up here, so it's a custody deal, and I got to be down there in court to help to try and make that happen at least at some point. So anyway, anyway, I got blindsided by this deal, but we will work it out. Um, there's a chance I may be back for the Thursday lecture, but I'm leaving tonight, and then this is recording this Monday night, so I'm leaving actually Tuesday morning, and so it's going to be just a back and forth trip, hopefully pretty quick, but we'll see. Anyway, I don't want you guys to get behind, and I don't want to try and cram two lectures into one, so we will just continue on per normal. So this one tonight, we're going to be talking about, well, project planning, which is pretty critical stuff. So most of the elements of this I am going to review in class, or at least the key parts, critical path management and the project stuff, because it's good stuff, and you'll use it. Project planning, Bechtel is a big company that does major league projects. I think I referred to them last week in terms of like some of the ethical things, because they do projects that go into some pretty nasty areas. If you need a pipeline going from northern Iran on over to the Mediterranean, you got to go through some pretty hostile territory, and so you got to be fairly flexible, and you also got to kind of adapt the culture in terms of getting things done, which means that these guys will kind of step back from the limelight, because it's not a good idea to be. There's nothing to be gained to being that public when you're engaged in rough business. Anyway, and then project scheduling. So project controlling, project management, PERT and CPM. So, you know, um, what these are, they're different techniques to keep control of a project. And this stuff predates computers, because projects have been done forever. And and people have come up with simple visual ways that are now even simpler, because you can keep it on a computer, but just the same, we'll look at those techniques. And then network diagramming, kind of flow chart looking stuff, which all these things are something like that. Activity on node, activity on network, again, flow charts, and that's just kind of a silly concept, but we'll run through it just in case you come across it. Project schedule. This thing, you've got a forward pass or a backward pass. Again, they're trying to impart terms here that make it sound more cosmic than it is. Forward pass just means, we start today and it's going to take 6 months to get it done, or we look at it, hey, we need this project done by such and such date. When do we need to start? So it's just figuring out your timing part of it. Slack time. Slack time means something in the project. Say if you got 6 months to do the project, and you actually have 8 months available when you get 2 months of slack time. Now it gets more involved in terms of critical paths when you have simultaneous elements of a given project, and you figure out, okay, what can wait, what can't, and we'll go through that. I'll be more accurate. Variability in activity times, 3-time estimates in PERT, and then project probability of project completion. Again, I'd say kind of a silly concept, but again, I'm not preparing you for my opinions on these things. I'm preparing you for what you likely see in industry, and sometimes people will use terms that are just uh, kind of silly, but if you don't know what they're talking about, you got to know the buzzwords, the language, in order to maintain your credibility, even if the concepts are not all that relevant. Okay, so back to, like I talked about, huge guys, 26 massive distribution things, big prisons, Caspian Sea, that'd be like northern Iran, up through Russia, and they also brought that out by whatever, Diyarbakir or whatever, a couple places in Turkey that are, anyway, shoot, name escapes me. It's right there next to Syria. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. It just goes through all the stands, and it goes through just some really rough areas of the world. Dubai Airport. I mean, I worked on Dhahran Airport, which is in Saudi, was the largest airport ever. It was like 26 miles across. We literally got lost taxiing a jet there one time because it was just so massive. We had to shut the jet down and have people come help us, because the place is just massive. So anyway, if you need a project like that done, these are the guys who do it. subways from scratch. Um, you know, Croatia. Again, these guys are used to working in rough parts of the world and getting things done. So the value of this class is these are the guys who do projects. Again, another political problem was um, they were paid for doing their work after Iraq. Somebody was going to get paid, but anyway, they were portrayed as profiteers. Whatever. I mean, somebody was going to do it, and they were the guys. They aren't Halliburton. They aren't any of those folks. They were just same project management guys who just have more projects. We aren't going to talk so much about the Hard Rock Cafe Rock Fest thing because that's kind of goofy. It's just a rock concert, and like I say, Hard Rock doesn't do those anymore, to my knowledge, and at least what I read on their company website and some of the other things that wasn't working out for them. But anyway, project management activities. So this whole thing again is going to be a circle. Schedule, control, planning, and then you start over again. You see how your plan worked out. So standard planning cycle, nothing novel. I'm going to watch a video right now, or we're going to watch a video right now about Arnold Palmer Hospital. At the end of the course, you'll see normally if we were taking attendance, I would pass out things in class right now and you'd fill them out, talking about some of the attributes about Arnold Palmer Hospital and how it's different from say one of the projects like we talked about with Bechtel and what the differences would be. But anyway, let me get to the videos and we'll take a look. Everything should be normal here. In fact, I'll even boost it up just because I don't get bored. We're expediting. There we go.
By the time today passes, the equivalent of a new kindergarten class will have been born at Arnold Palmer Hospital for Children and Women in Orlando, Florida. No small feat for a facility designed to handle just half that volume. In 2004, well over 10,500 births took place in a facility designed in 1989 to handle 6,900. Neonatal intensive care occupancy was often at capacity. Bursting at the seams, hospital administrators studying local trends knew they had to do something. That something was to develop a plan for an entirely new hospital for women and babies across the street. After much analysis, forecasting, and discussion, a new hospital holding 273 beds was chosen. In order to make the new building project go smoothly, project management techniques were used. Projects are a series of related tasks directed toward a major output, in this case, a new hospital building. Projects are headed by project managers who direct team members to be sure all necessary activities are completed in proper sequence and on time, the project comes in on budget, quality goals are met, and project team members get the motivation, direction, and information needed to do their jobs. A work breakdown structure is required to show how tasks are broken down to the activities needed to be completed. At the top level is the project itself, then major tasks, subtasks in major tasks, and the activities within the tasks that need to be completed. Let's see how Arnold Palmer Hospital used project management for its new building project.
It was important to us to provide an environment for our patients that was different than we have provided for them in the past. Moving from an institutional environment to more of a hotel type environment. We believe that the environment does have an impact on one's recovery and happiness while in the facilities, and that was important to us. We also wanted to build this hospital in a very cost-effective way, both in terms of the upfront construction cost as well as the ongoing operational cost of running the hospital. So we wanted to come up with a solution that got a lot of bang for our buck, in a sense. We knew that with the increases in supply costs and labor cost, that wasn't going to be easy, but we knew that there was an opportunity to be creative, to do it differently, while at the same time doing it for less.
Hodges and his staff spent 13 months discussing expansion needs involving doctors, nurses, patients, and the community before developing a proposal for the new $100 million facility.
We had initially 35 user groups, and within each of those user groups, we tried to assemble sort of a multidisciplinary mix. We had physicians, we had nurses, we had respiratory therapists, we had child life staff, we had social workers, we had environmental service workers, food and nutrition workers, everybody, because everybody has a role here. Everybody has a very important role here.
We had a finance team. We had a budget team. We had a certificate of need team. We went down the list and said, what are the tasks that are going to be required to be completed, and developed the teams around that. We then took those teams and rolled them up into what we called our core team. Some people refer to it as the Supreme Court, but the core team that then met and coordinated each of the different efforts from the individual teams to be sure, again, that we were addressing the issues, solving the issues, and putting a plan in place to actually accomplish the different steps that were required to be done.
And we have estimated that we have had well over 1,000 planning meetings to get this hospital exactly the way that we want it.
Some of the new hospital's features were driven by existing design limitations.
We really utilized our frontline staff and asked them, what do you like about this building? What don't you like? We were able to mock up 3 of our typical rooms that are used throughout the new Women and Babies Hospital. This is our postpartum suite, our labor and delivery suite, and a typical neonatal room. And what this allowed us to do is we put drywall up, brought a couple beds down there, and we first worked out the flow and operations of each of those rooms. Staff took butter paper and they allowed themselves to find out, okay, where would I want to plug? What drives me crazy in the current design that I can change because I'm part of the process this time? So we put in the fact that this is where I want to light a plug. This is the family space. This is the patient space. And then this is the caregiver space. We took it to a second level in June of 2004, and we said, okay, let's fill the rooms or build them out completely. So what we did was we put the artwork on the walls. We put all of the furniture and equipment in. We looked at some of the custom-built cabinetry and says, does this work for what you need? And based on that, we actually made a third mock-up.
Funding and regulatory issues added substantial complexity to this major expansion, and Carl Hodges was concerned that the project stay on time and within budget. Tom Hyatt, Director of Facilities Development, was given the on-site project management task. Arnold Palmer Hospital depended heavily on MS Project, one of the most popular project management programs. They used all the project management techniques described in this chapter of your text. The new building officially opened its doors to the community in the spring of 2006. Has all the project management effort paid off?
It's been an experience of a lifetime. For me, I've said that over and over again, and I think for the whole administrative team. We have really been involved with something that will truly leave a legacy in this community, and we're so proud of that.
Managing this massive project took 4 years. From the pre-planning Kathy Swanson described, to the years of construction Carl Hodges and Tom Hyatt directed, to the final ribbon cutting. It's a perfect example of how important PERT and CPM are in operations management. Without tools like MS Project, which is detailed in this chapter, there was no way for Arnold Palmer's managers to stay on top of the hundreds of often conflicting activities. Try tackling the video case study at the end of this chapter to get a feel for Tom Hyatt's use.
Alrighty then. So my point with that, would be in terms of challenging projects, I'm not sure I'd put up this hospital, in Bechtel's category, or looking at something like the Kinnick Arm Bridge, if that were ever to happen. I mean, that's the first thing. Is that ever going to happen? And when it does, the funding's going to be an issue, the criticality with the weather, the engineering. I mean, you would dream that you would have a hospital. I mean, who's against that? They already own the land. It's a fairly straightforward construction thing. I mean, my point would be that in terms of project management, this is kind of a softball, and that most projects are going to be far more complex, at least in the real world, things you'll probably get yourself involved in. And so that really necessitates your understanding of project management type tools. The MS project, we aren't going to necessarily go there in class because you could, but again, I'd be teaching you the nuances of a software package that changes. I mean, it's whatever software, and MS Project isn't the only one out there. They're all going to have their different characteristics, and it's going to be a different package by the time you guys would actually employ it. So there's not really much value in that because we can do it here manually in terms of class, and then later on, you'll see those same diagrams, the same theory and all that stuff, and it won't be this magic to just spit out. You'll know actually kind of how they did it. It's not going to be a huge math problem by any stretch, but just the same, I'm not going to waste time with MS Project for what we're trying to get out of it. Now, the other thing about project management is that it is just accepted that it's one of those things that looks easy from the outset. From an outsider, your boss and wherever, if they're even in the same place, which again drives you to using software type solutions so you can communicate back and forth electronically. But anyway, they aren't going to know the little fires that pop up, and you need to concentrate on the little things and the big things in terms of the sequencing of the project. That's kind of just, they view that as the easy part. So that's why you need to be organized. You need to have everything laid out in a sequence so that you can, spend all your time on the little, 5% of the issues that generate, 90% of the problems, and have these people's confidence. I mean, even if you're able to manage a project, but you appear a little bit unorganized, you're not doing yourself any favors because people don't have confidence in you. If you make it look easy by being organized, you'll move on. And for most folks too, project management, especially like with Booz Allen, the company I consult for, they have specialists who are project managers who kind of go around, and so it's almost like a military type thing. If you're the project manager for something like a dam or something like that, you may find yourself moving from project to project, you and your family, if that's the case. And so it's good to know, and it's a good certificate. People often get that, but in terms of wanting to do it for a career, it'd be interesting. But man, it would be challenging, and it might involve more travel than I would care to do, at least now. I'm not into that. So yeah, these are some of the things: environmental, political, financial, labor. I mean, these guys had really none of those issues, it sounds like, to deal with. They're just talking about where the plugs are going to go. Most people would be very happy to only have problems like that. So project organization, I kind of got a little bit ahead of ourselves. Sometimes a temporary structure, but usually specialists, and headed by a project manager. So, and then they do this whole matrix thing, which again, just another buzzword for a group of folks who come together. So Gantt charts, pretty simple type stuff. We'll talk about Gantt charts, critical path management, and then program evaluation and review technique, which is PERT. So a simple thing, for this is a Gantt chart. And the thing about this chart, specifically, you get an idea of, what needs to come on first. Like the passengers are going to go before the passengers are going to be deplaned and before the passengers board, obviously. But you don't have a flow chart type setup. And so it's good visual type stuff, and it's, can be used in combination with something else. But this isn't necessarily the thing that you would use for sequencing of the project. Like I said, this stuff's been going on for a long time. So CPM, DuPont was doing this back in the 50s before computers, and like I said, Booz Allen Hamilton, used it for missiles. So anyway, people use these projects, and it's good stuff. And you need, beyond a Gantt chart, you need this precedence of relationships and interdependencies. So we'll show you a little bit about it. Steps of PERT and CPM, define the project, develop the relationships, draw the network. So you're just going to do this as you draw the chart, which will make more sense to you. assign time or cost estimates, and then compute the longest time path through the network. This is called the critical path. So the critical path it's kind of it can confuse you, because if I say what is the longest path through the network, you'd say, okay, that's a critical path. And then if I said, what is the shortest time the project could get done? Well, again, that's going to equate to the length of the critical path. So the shortest, longest thing sometimes screws people up. But if you think about it logically, it makes sense. And then use the network to help plan, schedule, monitor, control. So this is not PERT CPM stuff. This is just activity on network and activity on node, which I think is just a goofy thing. I've never used the activity on arrow. I've always used the activity on node. So, task A, then you have an arrow, and then task B. But this thing where you have, the circle, and then the A, that task B, and the arrow line. Anyway, if you see something depicted like that, that's how it's defined: activity on arrow, activity on node. Not a critical item. Here, so you can see we're looking at activity on node. So that's the last I'll say of that whole business, because this is typically what we're going to deal with. These guys are doing a project. They're starting, and obviously task A and task B can start simultaneously. We get up to task A there. Task A can start 2 new tasks. That'd be C and D. And task B just goes into task D. Now, if you're looking at task D, you want to start task D. What's graphically they're showing here is that both A and B need to be complete before you can start task D. For task C, you only need A complete. So anyway, it'll make more sense when we put numbers and things associated with this, and then you can use it for project planning. Critical path analysis. Critical path is the longest path through the network, which I said. It's also the shortest time. So again, that shortest, longest thing. Just make sure that's straight so you don't get that confused. Any delay in the critical path delays the entire project. So, some people refer to it as the long pole in the tent, the limb fact, the whatever. When you've got the critical path and it gets delayed by, say, a week, well, the whole project's delayed by a week. If something's on the critical path, it does not have slack time. You can't delay something on the critical path and it not have an effect on the overall time completion. Again, I'll run through this stuff next week when I get back, but it's kind of critical. This is sort of the secret decoder ring thing. I don't typically, the latest start, latest finish, I don't typically use those numbers, because you could figure it out if you have the other numbers, and it just kind of garbages up your chart and your thought process. So what you do have on here, though, is you have the activity name. So this could be, that A up there. That could be, dig the ditch or build the wall or do whatever. That's your task at hand. And in this case, it's going to take 2 of something, activity duration. So we'll call it 2 weeks, right? So if your earliest start, let's say you can start on day 1. So earliest start is confusing, by saying day 1, but let's say you can start on 0 day, right? It's going to take 2 weeks. So that EF, earliest finish, would be 2 weeks, right? So that's pretty easy, and you want to keep this easy, like I said, because you want to be able to, there's going to be problems with projects, and you need to work on those problems, and the scheduling stuff needs to be kind of something that you can, change and get up to speed real quick. So here's this same project type thing. We're starting on week 0 up there, and we're going to go up to task A. So the entry, earliest start is 0. Task A, 2 weeks, 2 weeks. When we get over to task C, it's just waiting on task A. So we start task C at the 2 week point. It takes 2 weeks, and now we're at 4 weeks. And B down there on the bottom, you start from the start. So 0 plus 3 and 3 weeks. So this whole thing, these are fairly simple diagrams, but they could morph and get bigger and bigger. This is actually something that you might find on the test. So like I said, the little decoder thing, I put that up there on the top, and you'll find that on the test too, because this isn't a memorization thing. And you know, when you get to do this on a project, you'll use some sort of software that's going to display it like this, so it's not really hiding it from you. So circle the arrows defining the critical path. So first, you want to find the critical path. Anytime you're given a problem like this, you're going to look at the critical path. So we've got a couple things, and it's easy to use now that we're not using A and B. We're actually using tasks, so it's a little easier to keep straight in your head. So we've got, you know, building design, environmental design and review, materials order, zoning, and then construction. So building design takes 3 weeks, right? Environmental study and review takes 6 weeks. So initially, what's going to be the longest path there? Well, that's 6 weeks, right? So we would circle that first arrow, and let me see, it's going to actually highlight on this thing. So you'd circle here, and then we're looking at 2 outcomes here from the environmental study review. One's the zoning approval, and then one is the material order delivery time. Material delivery time takes 8 weeks. Zoning approval only takes 2. So we're going to go up. So we'd circle that arrow. And then obviously we got to get over here, so we're going to circle that arrow. So the critical path is as shown over here, down over to there. And 14 weeks is when you start that. 9 weeks to get it done. 23 weeks. So 23 weeks is the quickest we can get this thing done. So materials arrive a week early. Okay, before you go any further, you go, okay, materials arrival. Where is that? That's right here, you know, order and delivery time. So it is on the critical path. So from what we said, a week early, you could actually complete the project a week early. Before you make that statement, though, you got to look down here below. And if this was like 7 weeks, then you'd have, you know, an issue where these things were the same time. And so you'd have to, you know, split it out a little further into days and things like that to actually figure out which one was truly longer. And the last one here, it takes an extra month to complete the environmental study. How does this affect the project completion date? Again, it's on the critical path, and it's going to cost you time, and it's going to, you know, switch this. Well, it's going to switch the earliest start date up here. It's going to add 4 more weeks onto it, right? An extra month. So now you're looking at 10 weeks before you can start that. Anyway, it's going to ripple on through the thing, and it's going to make you a month late. So we'll go through more of those as when I get back, and there'll be more of those on the exam. But you'll find something like this on the exam. So also the like I said, the final is cumulative as well. So you'll see another one of these on the final. So get your arms wrapped around it. Oh, there we go. So forgot this slide built like that, but anyway, now you can see the arrows, and the bottom part might be cut off there. Again, on critical path, project delayed by 1 month. You'll be able to see it in your materials section. The actual slides that we're going over tonight are there too. Okay, so this is, I say, kind of silly, but anyway, 3 times estimates are required. Optimistic time, everything goes according to plan. Pessimistic time, most likely time. So is there any real value? I mean, you're going to make this thing as you know, accurate as possible, but people know that, you know, a plan is only a plan. Trade-offs, you know, project behind schedule, completions move forward. Anyway, if you are on a project and they want to get it done quicker, you know, maybe there's been a delay, so it's really not going to get done quicker, but now you're in a part of the project and they say, we need to speed this up, we need to get it done. And so shortening the duration of the project, they call that crashing. So kind of an unusual word, but that's, you know, in that sense, that's what they mean. So, you know, when you make an estimate, you say, okay, working, you know, 2 8-hour shifts, this is how much we can get done with this amount of equipment and this amount of people, and it's a, you know, reasonable expectation. And then all of a sudden, you know, things hit the fan, they need to get it done now, or there's been weather or something, you need to speed it up. So you go to a third shift. You know hire out a bunch more equipment. Anyway, that's project crashing. PERT and CPM. All these things need to be done. Clearly defined, precedents established, estimates done, and you can also, again, if you're not organized, you get so wrapped up about some, element of the project that's taken too long, and you micromanage that thing, and just about then something else snaps up and bites you where you kind of ignored it. So, again, if you're organized, if you're, most of these things are graphically depicted, which is a huge, huge help. So it keeps you from making stupid things. Believe it or not, that was the project management part of it. And again, I'll run through some of these when we get back. I'm going to jump right into forecasting just because this is going to be one mammoth YouTube kind of thing. Strategic importance of forecasting. Again, the human resources thing in any endeavor is the most critical. People do not like to be messed with. People, and especially as you get older, I mean older as in, I mean more people depending upon you in terms of families, children's daycares, everything else. You don't want to be screwing things up in terms of changing schedules abruptly. So a forecast will allow you to have the correct number of folks. Capacity is also critical because capacity a lot of times, if you need, such and such size factory, well, how do you know what size factory you need unless you've got an accurate forecast? And then supply chain management, how are you going to get the stuff there, and what's a suitable vendor for the volume you're talking. So 7 steps in the forecasting system. We won't talk too much about that other than some of these approaches and stuff. You've got two different kinds of approaches in any kind of research, really, to include forecasting. But qualitative, the touchy-feely, fuzzy stuff, and then quantitative, somebody with a calculator looking at raw numbers. And so is either one better? Usually the best is some sort of hybrid type thing where you take into account different things. Like, let's say you're selling snowmobiles or snow machines, whatever, and you're trying to figure out how many to order for the next year. You would look at using quantitative, the numbers. You'd look at how many were sold last year, and maybe the growth in the area, or the numbers about the economic forecast, something like that. And that's almost even getting into quantitative when you start doing the fuzzy kind of interpretation. But the qualitative would be, hey, we just came out with a new model snow machine, or the competition just came out with a new model and we got nothing new. All we got is our same old stuff. There's going to be things like that you betcha are going to have huge impacts on your sales. And unless you want to be short of snow machines or holding a huge inventory and dumping them at the end of the season, you got to get that right. Time series forecasting, decomposition of a time series. We'll get a little bit into that. And then naive approach. Naive approach is just, sometimes it's the simplest approach that works. But a naive approach is, we sold 500 last year. I'm saying we're going to sell 500 this year. You know what I mean? And that's all it is. But unless you've got good data to point you away from it, it might not be inaccurate. So time series forecasting, moving averages, chimp projections, seasonal variations, cyclical variations. So we'll go through all of these. The masters of this, and I wish I had a video, but they will never release it, is Disney. The guys at Disney, they've got fantastic accuracy with their forecasting, because it's such a huge part of their business. I mean, they've got so many international visitors that are coming. They've got weather. They've got attitudinal things like how do people like the U.S., or how driven are they to attending their parks. But if they can't get this right, I mean, it definitely impacts upon their bottom line. Also, if you think, I don't know how many you've been to Disneyland, Disney World, but if you think, oh, I'm going to go on a Tuesday in the middle of winter and it's going to be great because I'll have the place to myself, the park's not open that much. It'll be, open later. I don't know, but I've been there with my daughter when it opens up like at 10 or something, and it's done by about 5 or 6 or something. Whereas in the summer, a lot more people, but it's open all that time long. So they control their personnel, they control all their costs, they control everything, all based upon forecasts. So, they're gonna optimize that. Yeah, they've got daily, weekly, monthly, 5-year. So everybody's going to use it, and use opening times, like I said. Staffing levels, number of guests admitted. The incentives they can influence how many folks are going to show up by offering specials at a certain time of the year and all that stuff, and then knowing how many people are going to take them up on that. This is all forecasting. But what these guys do is they come up with awesome numbers, given that 20% from outside. They've got all these things to deal with, exchange rates, and all these economic models. 70 people and 30 analysts and 70 field people. And anyway, doing a bunch of surveys, a lot of interaction. And this is what they get. I mean, average forecast for annual forecast is between 0 and 3%. If companies could forecast with that kind of fidelity, well, there'd be a lot more companies in business. Forecast error over 5 years is only 5% off. That enables Disney to do what they've done, to become, premier in this industry. And that sort of technique. Anyway, so you aren't going to find, Disney putting out a video on YouTube about their system, because it's proprietary, it's valuable, and if other people could use it, they certainly would. We're going to look at this another one of these videos. This is a Hard Rock. Now, these guys, again, a little more ham-fisted. Wouldn't quite say they're up to Disney standards in terms of forecasting. Check it out.
Forecasting is fundamental to all organizations. Manufacturers use forecasting to determine the demand for products, the number of employees to hire, expansion needs for facilities, and ultimately, forecast profits. Similarly, in the service sector, restaurants and hotels must forecast capacity for the long term, purchasing contract blanket orders for the intermediate term, and for the short term, must use forecasting to schedule and purchase labor, food, and immediate supplies. Hard Rock faces all of these forecasting issues in its cafes, hotels, and nightclubs. Long-term forecasting is done to determine the capacity needed for growth of sales per store. In the intermediate term, contracts for items such as raw materials for leather jackets are issued 8 months out. And in the short term, food and labor must be forecast. Todd Lindsay, Senior Director, Finance, manages the forecasting activities.
Having an accurate forecast for sales is very important to our business because there's a number of things that we do with the sales forecast. Most importantly, all areas of the organization need to be plugged into an appropriate sales forecast for a year, anywhere from a year to a month to 5 years, because there's different areas of the company use a forecast for different things. Our purchasing managers, for example, will lock into long-term contracts for beef, for chicken, and for pork based on the sales forecast that we have. So it's very important that I know not only how many customers are coming to my existing locations, but also how many new locations are on the horizon for us in the development plans. It's also vitally important to us from a treasury function as well, because the sales forecast is what helps drive the profit forecast. Profit forecast drives the cash flow forecast. Therefore, when I go to the banks and I try to determine what my borrowing needs are going to be, it's a really good idea to have a pretty tight forecast on what your cash flows are going to be.
In the forecasting chapter of your text, a variety of forecasting techniques are presented. Many of these techniques are used at Hard Rock Cafe. Techniques such as moving averages, weighted moving averages, exponential smoothing, and regression analysis are employed.
At a Hard Rock Cafe, when we set our managers' bonus targets at the unit, we use a weighted average, and we take a weighted average of the last 3 years' performance, with the heaviest weighting being on the most current year's performance. And the weighting is 40, 40, 20, 40 being the most current year, 40 being a year prior to that, and the 20 being the earliest year, or 3 years prior. And we take a weighted average of that, and we set the targets. We set their bonus targets based on those averages, and to the effect that they can have the moving average exceed their target, then they get bonus for improving their sales.
Company forecasts also rely on these techniques.
We do a number of different forecasts at Hard Rock Cafe. We start out at the unit level, or the cafe level, and there's 55 owned cafes, and every month we do a forecast in each of those cafes. Those forecasts are then reviewed by me and my staff. We then roll those forecasts up for the month, for the quarter, and for the year. We take a look at what the performance looks like for the month versus what our budgeted expectations were, and then also what our performance was from the prior year. We try to isolate any major variances in the forecast and determine what the root cause of those variances are, and then make determinations on whether we need to make any changes in our course over the course of the year.
The primary issue for Hard Rock's forecasts is the number of people who walk through the door.
It's vitally important that we know how many people walk in the front door. The only way we know that is through capturing that data from our point of sale or POS equipment that's in each of the cafes. There's a definite count of customers that we capture based on the number of entrees that come out of our kitchens. We know actually how many people have come to dine with us, as well as we not only have that, but we also have an actual physical count of human beings that actually walk into the front door. So there may be people that come in for a dessert occasion or a bar occasion. So we know how many people in total came in the cafe, how many of those actually ordered entrees, and then we know exactly what they bought, because every single POS transaction is captured from the unit and is sent back to the corporate office, where we house that in a data warehouse. And from those transactions, then we compile all the statistics on the average consumer.
These statistics, when combined with data on weather, conventions, and food and beverage costs, affect the finalized forecasts. With the added expertise provided by the Hard Rock Cafe's general manager, these short-term schedules are determined. Long-term forecasts also are reviewed by corporate headquarters to ensure they reflect any planned changes, such as remodeling or menu changes. Hard Rock uses regression analysis when planning menu changes.
When we're looking at our menu, we sometimes use some advanced mathematical techniques, multiple regression analysis, per se, to identify how the demand in one particular menu item is related to the demand in other particular menu items. So we're able to take a look at our menu and drill down into what the actual price elasticity of demand is for one particular item. And as we move the price on that item, we can also look at what the actual impact is going to be on other related items. So as I move say for example, the price on a hamburger again up $1, I know that people are going to move off of that menu item, and I know what rate they're going to move off of that menu item, and then I know that I can actually identify where they're going to move to. They're going to move to sandwiches, or they're going to move to the chicken sandwich, or they're going to move to, if it's the cheeseburger I take up, maybe they're going to move off to the hamburger, or they're going to move to the hickory burger. But through multiple regression analysis on our menu items, we can identify what a change in pricing in one item is going to do to the demand for another.
The Hard Rock Cafe, like many service organizations, has unique forecasting needs that aren't always met with quantitative models. But you can be certain that the information resulting from Hard Rock's corporate use of forecasting techniques forms a solid basis for finalizing local forecast needs.
Sure, that wasn't it. Alrighty. So, what other factors might affect demand for hamburgers other than the dollar increase? My point here is, again, they're the linear regression analysis. It's good stuff in terms of you're looking at multiple factors and how one factor, the interdependencies and all that. But again, Disney, their model has a lot more factors in order to get the accuracy that they're shooting after. If especially when you're in an international kind of thing as Hard Rock, say let's one down in Orlando or something, and that week coincides with some special holiday. You have a whole bunch of visitors, let's say from India. Are hamburger sales going to be affected? Are different types of tourists going to be affected? Or this is just kind of, like I say, fairly crude because they aren't necessarily using enough factors to sort out really how much of a difference that $1 increase made. So my point would be that you need to, if you're in forecasting, you need to use all the factors that have relevance, but you need to get them all. The model that somebody like Disney uses is much more complex than just monkeying with the price of buck. And besides, how are you going to do that? I mean, you've got menus that are all printed up. You're gonna because you want to test some theory out, you're gonna reprint everything and you're gonna change everything around. That's not really a serious application of forecasting like we would talk about it. But weather conventions, regression analysis that we talked about, their weighted average thing too. We'll talk more about weighted averages, but it'll change. And again, Disney is kind of the gold standard when it comes to forecasting. Forecasting, I touched on this a little bit last week in terms of time frames that we use in operations management. Part of it is some are semi non-standard. The 3+ years for long range, most people agree on that. The medium range and the short range, depending on the overlap. Obviously, medium range, the end point is going to be 3 years, but where's the start point? Some people would argue it's at 1 year, some people would argue it's at 3 months, but that's neither here nor there. Short range, up to a year or less than 3 months. So anyway, what the point is in terms of forecasting, what are you going to do with a forecast? And in the short range stuff, yeah, you use it for purchasing, assigning jobs, workforce levels to a certain extent, maybe if it's getting out to a year. But if you hire somebody like 2 weeks out to cover some sort of surge, you got to train that guy. That's not really extra workforce. That's a problem. 3, the medium range stuff, sales, production, planning. So, and then long range, you can actually build in capacity, build a new facility, do something like that. So, important. The reason why capacity and all these other things are critical is because things have a life cycle. Products do, technology hugely. This, thing is getting kind of dated now, I'd argue. I've been in and out of Twitter in terms of buying the stock 3 or 4 times now, and it's all worked out. But, Facebook is, I don't know that I would jump back into, well, I'm even skeptical about jumping back into Twitter just because things kind of age out, What was it, MySpace and then Facebook and then Twitter. Facebook may stay around, but it's got some downsides, and Twitter's having a tough time kind of monetizing itself. But anyway, the point is that when you're looking at a product and you're looking at capacity, you've got a fairly compressed time frame that you're working in. And let's say you're selling iPhone 5s. Well, this is not the time to be producing zillions of iPhone 5s when the 6 is going to come out here in probably a few weeks. And then when the 6 does come out, it's got to be out there in sufficient numbers to satisfy demand, so that you recoup all your investment stuff. Now, there's some artificiality, I'm fully aware of that, where you want a little bit of scarcity to generate increased demand because you can't get it. But all things being equal, you need, if you're just maroon, that you don't have the product out there because you can't produce it because you don't have the capacity, and it's some flat screen TV, whatever that technology that they'd currently be using, if you can't produce it in sufficient numbers, you're leaving a lot of money on the table. So companies will always try to, as one product is aging out, they'll have the follow-on product that's newer or different coming out. And certain companies, successful ones like 3M, they want a certain amount of their product mix to be stuff that just came out. But anyway, as you go through there, introduction, growth, maturity, decline. So introduction, probably not making much money here. You're just trying to get it out there, trying to get some market share. Growth phase, this is when you're making some cash. Maturity, you're just kind of riding it. And then decline, you're cutting back, you're not overextending yourself. So you're going to have competition coming in the arena at some point, up in the maturity stage where there's all the knockoff products. And but again, as your manufacturing costs actually may go down, since there's sort of a learning curve as people, as you more quickly produce that product, more efficiently produce it, you might be able to increase the margin. So we'll talk more about that as we go. But different forecasts, economic forecasts. So obviously, economics, what's going on in the business world. Technology is what's coming out, and then demand predicts sales of existing products. So I talked about this a little bit, the human resource element, the capacity. You have to be able to produce it in the supply chain. You got to, be latched up with vendors, or if it is yourself, if you're producing stuff in-house, you've got to have those details worked out. Forecast, that's just like a plan, seldom perfect. Stability in the system, which may or may not be good as, certain, if you're selling dog food, that's probably going to be fairly stable. But if you're selling some sort of technology, it could be all over the place. Anything else, you aggregate things, you put more numbers in a sample, and it's gonna smooth it out a bit. So qualitative and quantitative. So these are the qualitative things. Remember I said qualitative is the touchy-feely stuff. And this is really where you make your money. This is where experience comes in. How do you estimate how many, new phones are going to come out if it's a brand new model? I mean, an iPhone 6, is it going to be marginally better? Maybe a little bit. It's actually going to be bigger. I think it's going to be worse in my mind. But anyway, that's not as tough to estimate as when the iPhone was brand new. How do you know how it's going to be adopted? So new products, new technology, you need somebody who's getting paid the big bucks to do that intuition experience, Quantitative, this is where you can look back, how many new units of the iPhone 5 did we sell after the 4? The 6 is probably going to be a little bit more, so let's look at the numbers and do it from a math thing. But, going off in a closet with a calculator and kind of divorcing yourself from the real world is not a great technique. So a combination of the two is what you're going to be looking for. Jury of executive opinion. So you get a whole bunch of experts. How you define experts is the challenge. But, smart people who have some insight. Delphi method, we'll talk a little bit more about this, but that's a panel of experts. Salesforce composite, salesman, I've been a salesman, not whatever, they aren't necessarily known for their integrity, let's just say. Consumer markets survey, so anybody who's a salesman out there, my apologies. Consumer market survey, tough to get that done cheaply. Number one, it's not cheap, and it's hard to get accurate results. So this executive opinion, small group of folks, but you usually have a dominant person in there, any kind of committee type thing, and I like what you said, and they rally to that one person, and then you end up with a bunch of people in a room, kind of all behind one forceful person's opinion. So it's just group dynamics. It can sometimes lead to less than optimum results. Salesforce composite. I wasn't trying to say all salesmen are dishonest, but what I'm saying is if they're incentivized to make the sales projection, let's say, if they say they're going to sell 100 units, if they sell anything in excess of that, they get bonused. Well, they're going to lowball the estimate. Anyway, tends to be overly optimistic. So in this case, the incentives must be working the other way. Anyway, you incentivize somebody who's doing a survey, and that's not good. Delphi method, they try and do this hybrid approach: decision makers, staff, respondents. So theoretically, this should end up with a better result. But again, somebody who's got some experience and is somebody who's done this before and has gotten good results, a good track record, they're probably going to be one of your most valuable. Consumer market survey, what customers say, focus groups, and all that other stuff. Those things just don't happen. I mean, there's a whole industry in itself about how to get that done and how to get valid results from it. So that's pretty, it's complex is what it is. It's just not as easy as asking somebody. Time series components: trend, cyclical, seasonal, and random. So seasonal estimate or seasonal things were they're cycles. Exactly. You're going, yeah, that's the same as cyclical. So the difference between seasonal and cyclical is not that much. The seasonal component is really a cyclical component that's tied to the seasons. And then trends are, obviously going in one direction, and then random is what you say when things didn't quite happen like you expected. Disney, when they're getting 0% error on a 5-year or whatever 1-year forecast, they don't have random things because they're all over it. So random is sometimes used as an excuse for people that didn't quite get it done. So a trend, obviously, trend is downward in this case. So the thing is, though, that the trend in terms of sales of an item, that's kind of an expectation, especially when it goes on that curve and then starts getting on that downward trend. You don't necessarily fight that. You work with it. It happens, and you have another product, in the hopper that's coming out, and you deal with it. Seasonal components, so weather, customs, how things are gonna work out. And again, they're saying in the single year. So, if you're trying to sell whatever snow melt in March or April when the thing's almost done, probably not going to happen for you. But come here in a couple months, people will be all over it. So you would expect the sales to vary with the seasons. Cyclical component, again, same sort of thing, but this one's may or may not be tied to the seasons. It may just go with a business cycle or other things, political cycles. Things do tend to go from one extreme to the other, and you can sometimes find a pattern in there. Random, and they're just saying this is completely random. But again, I would argue that somebody studies it far enough, they will find out there is some sort of cause and effect. So naive, like I said, dead easy. You sold 68 last month. I'd go with 68 this month, unless something's changed. Maybe that's where you're at. At least that ought to be a starting point. So, moving average. What you do with a moving average is I'll do exactly what they say here. You look at a couple months, and it can be, if it's a seasonal type thing, it could be all January of 2014 coming up. January, well, you wouldn't have numbers for that. So yeah, you did. That's January 2014's already passed. Sorry, January 2014. 2013, 2012, and then you would average those numbers together. Or it can be in successive months if you're in a seasonal type thing. Here it's fairly simple. They're looking at January, February, March, and then they're going to divide by 3 because that's the number of periods they looked at, and that's what they come up with in an average. But if you look at these numbers a little closer, you can go, wait a minute, we sold 10 in January, 12 in February, 13 in March. What do we got going there? We got a trend, right? And what did our forecast just tell us? 11 2/3? I would not guess that we'd sell 11 2/3. I'd guess we'd sell 14, right? So they don't do trends very well, which will be an issue in a bit. This is a simple moving average. We'll also talk about a weighted moving average. It sounds more complex, and it's not that big a deal. So this is this bit about the trend. the actual sales, if you're using a moving average, you're going to see this lagging effect on a moving average, which isn't necessarily great. The linear regression or the multiple regression type stuff, it's more powerful, a lot more complex. There's courses at UAA that they'll do a multi-factor kind of problem, but that will be their project for the entire class. We don't quite have the luxury of that, but we'll discuss some of it in class. You can do a weighted moving average. So this is what the guy was talking about in that Hard Rock thing, where they're going to give more weight to the more current data, which kind of makes sense. So you can use whatever numbers you want, whatever weight, doesn't have to add up to 100 or something like that. The only thing that you have to keep clear is that denominator. In this case, they're using 6. They're dividing the whole thing by 6 there at the end. That's because they gave a weight of 3 to March and a weight of 2 to February, and then a weight of 1 basically to January. So those numbers, and the key thing is not to forget that 1 from the January. You don't multiply by 1, and they don't show that there, but anyway, so the total number of periods you're looking at is 6. You divide that out, you get 12 and a sixth. So guess what, that's a little closer to 13, or actually the 14 we would look at and just sort of common sense forecast. But anyway, it's going in the right direction, but it's still not quite there. And then the moving average versus the weighted moving average versus actual sales. So a little bit closer, but not there. Whoops, I'm sorry. We're going the other direction. Potential problems with moving averages: increasing the end smooths the forecast. So the numerator denominator, increasing the denominator, the end, the periods. You can make the numbers less erratic, but it's also less sensitive to change. So if you look back, like say 12 months, the numbers are going to be so weighted down, the inertia of all these periods that you're looking at is going to cause it not to be very responsive. It does not forecast trends well, we saw that, and extensive historical data, and good historical data. That's the other problem. It's easier now with point of sale type stuff, where numbers are actually compiled, but if you're asking people for numbers and they're just pulling them out of wherever, your forecast is going to be not accurate. Exponential smoothing, I'm not a big fan. This is a way to make your numbers look a little bit better, but doesn't really add anything in accuracy. So weights decline exponentially. Most recent data weighted the most. Requires a smoothing constant. So that constant, this is where it gets kind of unscientific in my mind. Ranges from 0 to 0.1, subjectively chosen, hence unscientific. Involves little record keeping, so, but there might have been some value in those past records. So I'll talk about that in class a little bit. I'm not going to show an example because you can get kind of wrapped up in the whole thing, but don't worry, we are not going to have an exponential smoothing problem on any of the exams, but we will sort of address it because they speak about it. Seasonal variations in data. So like I said, if it's something like a jet ski or a snow machine, there's going to be definitely changes in the season that are going to affect the sales. So find average historical data. So I already kind of told you about this when we looked at not if we're selling snow machines, you would not necessarily want to go with January, December, November of whatever year. You might want to look January to January, and whenever people are buying it. I would think by January most people who are going to buy a snow machine for that year would already purchased it. And if you're working off, say, November data, when people are still in the market to get out there, you might get screwed up numbers. So anyway, average historical demand for each season, compute the average, and compute the seasonal index for each one. Estimate the next year's total demand and divide the estimates. So not too tough. What you're going to use, though, is a tracking signal has to do with when the sales actually start happening. You're going to compare that to the forecast and see where you're at. See how accurate, and whether you should abandon that forecast and start up a new one, which is kind of, anyway, it's not of much value if you're just going to tear it up and start new. But if it's grossly inaccurate, you may not want to make any future decisions based upon it. And then this mean absolute deviation is just the cumulative forecast errors. So anyway, you're looking for something that has good tracking signal, has low values. Obviously, if it doesn't deviate much from your plan, then that's good. If it's continually high or low, you got something wrong. In terms of the long-term forecasting, there's something wrong in your model that you're using. You're going to see these sorts of diagrams a lot in operations management. You may have seen them in other things, but statistical control charts, so SPC type things. So statistical process control, so SPC. Anyway, you're going to have an average range where they're showing that 0 MAD type thing, and then an upper limit or lower limit. And as long as things are jiggy, bouncing around inside the lines, everything's good. But once it blasts out of that, that is a tracking signal because it's obviously outside the acceptable range. Adaptive forecasting, this is basically cheating. You basically monitor or modify your forecast to match the actual sales. So adjust the values, and the coefficients for exponential smoothing to continually minimize the forecast error. So what you're doing is you're updating the forecast, which is good, but are you getting to the root of why your original forecast was wrong? So, focus forecasting. There's some guys who, again, this gets back to the simple approach. American hardware supply, sophisticated forecasting model, no single technique, and so they just used historical data. And anyway, they used the model of lowest errors, then used to forecast the next month's demand. So these guys got very, very good results. But we'll again touch on that in class when I come back next week. Forecasting the service sector. So what we've been talking about literally is, or up until now, is mainly manufacturing, but it really does apply to services too. The unusual challenges, holidays and other calendar events, unusual events. Probably the best example here is Valentine's Day. Let's say, well, it could hit both services and goods. How you ever wanted to find a florist is, whether it's a good or a service, they're doing all the work there, but they're actually selling a product. But a restaurant is a little different. But anyway, let's say Valentine's Day and flower purchases. You may think, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to use last year's data, last February 14th, how many flowers do we sell? Well, guess what? What day of the week, Valentine's Day is February 14th, right? So if it fell on a Sunday versus a Tuesday or whatever, that's going to have a great impact on what the sales are. I mean, if Valentine's Day falls on a Sunday, for example, you could get by, taking your wife, your whatever, other out to dinner and not do the flower thing. If it falls on a Thursday, well, maybe you don't have that kind of time. Maybe it's going to be the flowers. And oh, by the way, well, flowers for your secretary, that's a little awkward. That might send a different signal. So I'm not going there. But I'm just saying the day of the week that a certain holiday falls on is greatly going to affect. Retailers are all freaked out depending on what day Christmas falls on, depending on how many weekends they're going to have in terms of shopping, because it makes a difference in sales. In services and restaurants and stuff, it's the same sort of thing. So there's a lot more to it. Just when you think you've got your arms wrapped around it, again, you get back to the Disney model and you realize there's more factors involved. In a restaurant, yeah, in terms of staffing and everything else, it's going to be at the meal time. So you would adjust your staffing accordingly. Now, you can't necessarily bring in people for 2-3 hours, but you could certainly have food serving tasks done at those off-peak times to balance the load. You don't have people out, folding napkins and cleaning floors in the middle of rush time. You do those kind of tasks at other times to smooth things out. But you have to have a forecast to know when those other times are. All right. So the homework is going to be some project management stuff. So 3.8, 91, 3.9, 91, and chapter 4, 4.1. Now it looked like on both editions they were the same page numbers. I was looking at the electronic versions of these ones, but I'll take a look. If there's an error, we'll get back after it. Yeah, this was the questions. So this would have been the format. You just would have filled it out. Don't worry about the attendance issues for this one. We'll catch up next week. Everybody will get credit for this week. Like I say, I plan to be back as soon as possible, potentially even for Thursday evenings. Thursday evening, but I don't want you guys to plan like that. So we aren't going to have a class Thursday night. We'll do it via video. I think that's the only way to make sense, especially if I miss a flight or something, and then we're all scrambling. So look forward to seeing you all next week. My apologies again for what's going on this week. It's largely out of my control, so we'll work it out. We'll talk to you next week. Thanks.